They wiped Karyn Miles from the directory, like she was a coffee ring on a conference table. The last message she sent before the purge was a reminder about lead abatement at a brick behemoth she'd flagged back in 2012, a converted shoe factory an old CFO swore would print cash. It printed black mold and lawsuits instead. Karyn handled it quiet, the way black women in back offices do. No headlines, no speeches, just a line item stamped resolved. 12 years of that. 12 years of fixing what swagger broke. 12 years of trading birthdays for parcel maps, slipping dinner into a stack of variance requests, and filing permits with a pen that never ran out. Magnolia Ridge Capital climbed from boutique fantasy to a mid-Atlantic force, the kind that made mayors smile, off the back of her unflashy brilliance. Her name never made the glossy deck. She was a ghost in their success photos, a margin note in their champagne. An intern finally slid her onto the website under regulatory support, which was both wrong and insulting. She stayed anyway. Some folks aren't chasing applause. They're married to precision, to facts that don't blink, to paper that remembers what mouths forget. Please like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Old heads knew her, even if they didn't parade her. Otis LeGrand had the vision, Malik Chenier the cash, D'Angelo Rivera the chaos. They were saints and gamblers in the same breath. Karyn turned their maybe into recorded deeds. She built the compliance bones that let them borrow cheap, and often. When the Riverside infill plan buckled, she rescoped the whole thing overnight and walked a variance through a civic committee that met in a church basement and voted with a hymn in their throats. No credit, just clean results. Her desk was a battlefield of red folders, topo maps, and cold coffee with lipstick ghosts on the rim. Always 5 moves ahead, thanked only when the explosion didn't happen. The fatigue wasn't the work. It was the vanishing. Her name wasn't on the marquee, but her fingerprints were on every ledger, every indemnity clause, every crooked easement that needed straightening. Then came the first hairline crack. Whispers that Otis and Malik were cashing out. D'Angelo, always the one who trusted her eyes, closed his door and said without looking up, "Keep us steady, Kay. If it goes sideways, use your judgment." He didn't have to say more. The sharks were coming. She opened a drawer and went to the paper. Grayson Pike arrived like a rented sports car. Gleam first, substance later. Tall, loud, sure of himself in a way that said he'd never been cornered for real. His entourage of ivy teeth and dead eyes moved through Magnolia Ridge like roaches in cufflinks. They called it modernization. Karyn could already smell rot behind the smiles. The day his group closed on Otis and Malik shares, the floor shifted. Desks empty. Titles invented. Narrative architect. Urban imagination lead. Comedy in silk ties. Karyn's title turned into a question mark on a whiteboard in a room she wasn't invited to. First, she stopped getting copied on acquisitions. Then her drive access flickered and went dark. IT shrugged toward Grayson's office, which sent her a calendar block labeled Role Transition. The meeting felt like a living eulogy. 2 HR strangers with soft voices said words like streamlining and synergies. "Karyn, your contributions are deeply valued." Her left eye twitched. She raised a hand. "Save the list. Hand me the packet." She smoothed her blazer, pocketed her pen, habit, not hope, and nodded like a pastor closing a casket. Not mad. Not broken. Just done. Only, they missed the part where Karyn was still in the room. And paper never forgets. They erased her title. They didn't yank her history. Her signature lived in the bones of deals no one had bothered to modernize. She was still an original signer on 3 redevelopment frameworks buried in archival folders spelled wrong. Her inbox, until they killed it, was a museum of timestamps, scanned exhibits, and wet ink PDFs folks treated like coasters. Grayson bragged at Friday All Hands about clearing out clutter to make room for visionaries. Someone said, "We don't need librarians. We need pirates." Karyn sipped lukewarm coffee from her mug that said Asset Whisperer and watched their chests puff on mute. When they finally mentioned her, Karyn Miles, longtime VP, has decided to explore new opportunities. No one looked at the camera. No one offered the floor. They didn't deserve goodbye, so she kept it. After hours, she logged into legal archives one last time, pulled a full asset transfer register from the internal ledger, and sent it to herself with the subject line, "For reference, legacy." She stuck a note to her monitor. Nobody reads the quiet ones. Then she slipped her badge under a planter by the elevator. They thought she left empty-handed. They were half right. She carried something heavier than boxes. She carried proof. 10 months before Grayson's buzzword brigade stormed the place, Karyn sat alone at 9:41 p.m., chewing stale pretzels and editing the 5th draft of a Frankenstein called the Haviland Corridor Realignment, HCR, because acronyms make mediocre plans feel like salvation. 7 parcels. 3 mayors who didn't speak. Air rights in litigation. A half-demolished trolley barn every preservation group wanted to turn into a yoga museum. Bad soil. Worse politics, Karyn called it lasagna. With every layer, the grease got louder. But it mattered. Haviland was legacy magnolia, one of the first buys, back when Otis and Malik argued about office chairs versus Storm's sewer permits. It was history with the hangover. It was risk begging for an adult. So she wrote the thing nobody reads. A writer inside Section 12B, tucked under joint oversight, stating that any transfer of assets exceeding $28 million market-adjusted value required written, notarized consent from all original signers to the framework. Legacy protection, she told D'Angelo and Otis as they scrolled their phones. We ain't letting some hot knife flip our bones to parking lots for a quarterly pop. Otis grunted. Sounds like good governance. D'Angelo, practical, said, don't tie my hands on small moves. Exemptions under 28, she replied. Only the big swings. They e-signed from the back of an audit meeting, thumbs tapping like it was a food order. No questions. No flags. Because governance is boring until it explodes. Karyn saved the executed framework in 3 places, backed it up on an encrypted drive, and printed 2 hard copies, one for the vault, one for her. She slid her copy into a manila folder labeled HCR_JV6_final and scribbled, consent trigger, all original signatures required. It went into her second drawer behind a jammed stapler and a flyer for an arbitration seminar she never made in Tulsa. Then she went back to work, not planning revenge, not playing chess. Just being the grown-up in a room addicted to shortcuts. Magnolia was getting too fast, too loud, too convinced it could outrun paper. Karyn laid a tripwire disguised as policy. Months later, Grayson sniffed blood in spreadsheets and declared that legacy constraints are psychological. Disruption, he said, like a sermon. He never asked about old frameworks. He never thought to. When they cut her loose with 2 weeks and a smile sharpened into a weapon, Karyn didn't blink. She went home, opened the drawer, smoothed the folder flat, and said under her breath, let's disrupt. The first time she felt gone, she was eating half a banana and a handful of almonds at her kitchen counter, freelance editing a zoning appeal for a friend just to keep her brain from rusting shut. Habit made her click Magnolia's public ledger. The drop-down that once had her as compliance principal now read, vacant. Credentials gone. Even the quarterly memos she'd authored had been sandblasted into Magnolia Momentum, her analysis cut and paste beneath a paragraph about future-forward leadership. She didn't need applause. She needed accuracy. The erasure felt like theft, a hand in her pocket, a voice in her mouth. A decent analyst texted her. They'd renamed folders tagged KM_oversight to Legacy Review, as if her work were a dusty quilt. A consultant from New York had arrived to streamline redundancies. Translation: darts thrown at contracts in the dark. At a happy hour she didn't attend, a LinkedIn smile called her legacy overhead. Laughter. On an investor call, Grayson bragged, we cut dead code and got lean. Karyn was the dead code, the operating system they were rebooting from. The final slap came in a draft press release she intercepted through a buyer contact, a $410 million portfolio consolidation crowning Grayson a visionary. No Karyn. No truth. She stared 10 full minutes at the release, feeling nothing but a clean, winter-tile kind of cold. She didn't want her name. She wanted the facts to line up. The $410 million move wasn't one deal. It was 6 properties cross-stitched with liabilities and regulators who like to wake up early. In one of those, Haviland, there lived a small, notarized, time-stamped problem. A writer signed months before Grayson learned everyone's names. They could repaint her memos. They could change her passwords. They could call her ghost. But they couldn't change the paper in her apartment safe. The closing date sat 3 weeks out. 3 weeks until a junior on the buyer's team did what smart juniors do: read. 3 weeks until someone realized a missing signature could turn celebration into case law. Karyn didn't want revenge. She wanted time to meet truth. At 9:04 a.m. on a Tuesday, she sent 3 sentences to a man named Terrence T.R. King at Brookline and West, the buyer. She remembered him from a 2019 dinner. Club soda, napkin notes, a mechanical pencil that made his hand look careful. Terrence, please review Haviland Framework 2021, Section 12b. There's a consent inconsistency tied to authority that requires attention before execution. KM. 2 hours later, unknown number. Voicemail. Then a text. Reviewed 12b. Please call immediately. Confidential. She reheated coffee until it tasted like regret and dialed. He picked up on the first ring. Why did no one mention this writer? No hello. Karyn's voice stayed smooth. Because they didn't read it. Or they thought it was ceremonial. It isn't. It's notarized, time-stamped, still binding. Aggregate transfer crosses the threshold 3 times over. Silence. Pages flipping. You're one of the original signers? Compliance officer of record. The clause doesn't hinge on my employment. It hinges on my signature. Paper rustled, like a man ducking a train. If we handle this right, he asked. Clean. Revised signatory memo and acknowledgment. No headlines. He exhaled, a sound like a wall deciding not to crack. I need to escalate quietly. It won't leak from me. Pause. They invite you to the gala? They didn't. You're invited now. After, she watched the light shift in her apartment, gray like bank lobbies. They would scramble. They would lawyer verbs and pray no one noticed the date on the notary stamp. They'd ask her for a retroactive waiver like apology, and bribe had the same face. They were late. In Karyn's world, late is worse than wrong. 2 days later, LinkedIn carried the trumpet. Magnolia Ridge to celebrate historic $410 million portfolio transfer at the Langston Royale. Black tie. Press welcome. Photos of Grayson gleaming like he'd invented dirt. A DJ named Q, Silk promised ambient synths. The gala was 2 nights ahead of closing. Enough time to pose, not enough time to unwind a fuse. Her invite arrived via encrypted PDF from Terrence, misspelling her name. Karyn. She RSVP'd yes. She slid the original Haviland framework into a leather folio, the notarized stamp clean as a whistle, the edges worn like a prayer card. She didn't need a spotlight. She needed a table. Inside Magnolia, Grayson's reply to a mounting internal memo was 1 sentence, copy-pasted into 5 threads. She doesn't work here, irrelevant. He laughed in a team sync, kicking back in his chair like gravity owed him. We don't owe squat to a former VP, with an attitude. Buyers flexing. Smoke. No one wanted to say, actually, she wired a kill switch. At Brookline and West, the mood was sober. Their general counsel, Dr. Evie Parks, had flagged the writer with language that clicked shut like a seatbelt. Per attached, unresolved consent requirements risk incomplete transfer. She highlighted. She timestamped. She waited. Grayson didn't read. The courtesy invite came corrected, Karyn with AY. Terrence's note was short. Visibility might help. She arrived 10 minutes early in a matte black sheath that cut like a thought. No jewelry, no gloss, just the folio tucked under her arm and an expression that said, I read what you skip. The ballroom looked like money had dreams. Water wall, mirrored centerpieces, champagne towers shivering under a chandelier that needed its own claws. Magnolia staff floated in designer shoes, trying not to show their blisters. Grayson was center stage. Teeth, camera, repeat. This portfolio is the benchmark. Vision meets execution. Karyn stole the back row behind a potted fiddle leaf, sipping ice water. Terrence caught her eye and nodded. Small, grateful. His tie was crooked like honesty. Dr. Parks scanned the room like she was marking exits. When her eyes landed on Karyn, there was relief, not surprise. The people who mattered knew about the writer. You could see it in the tight corners of their smiles. Admitting it now would invite questions they didn't have lies ready for. The new game was stall and grin. Pretend gravity isn't real. Karyn didn't have to make a scene. Gravity would. The signing was scheduled for 8:30 p.m. in the Zora room upstairs. Polished oak, velvet chairs, a brass placard, Magnolia Ridge/Brookline and West finalization. 8 pens laid out like surgical instruments. Press lined against the wall smelling a story they couldn't name yet. Grayson, in full performance mode, practiced his victory laugh. Champagne bottles in ice buckets wore the closing date like jewelry. Karyn slipped through the rear door and sat against the back wall, folding her coat over her lap. Invisible again where she did her best work. The table hummed with small talk. A junior notary arranged the pen sequence like it mattered. Someone joked about who'd sign first. Grayson smirked. Ladies first. Except when it's credit, then I'll go. Dr. Parks cleared her throat, calm as a switch. Before we proceed, one clarification regarding Haviland, Section 12. B. Rider Clause. Heads tilted. Grayson waved air. Legacy Clause. Internal cleared it. She didn't smile. She slid a page to Magnolia's lead counsel, Clifford Howe, a man who wore the haunted gaze of someone who missed the 90s. He skimmed, then read again. His jaw set. The laughter thinned like cheap perfume. Karyn watched the color slide out of his face like a tide. Clifford removed his glasses, looked at Grayson with the dread of a man measuring a train. It's tied to the joint venture, not employment. It's airtight. Grayson laughed without air. She's gone. She has no standing. Terrence turned, slow as church, and pointed to the back. Heads followed like a tide. Karyn didn't nod, didn't wave. She opened the folio and laid the original framework across her lap. The notary's stamp winked in the chandelier light like a patient fuse. Clifford's voice went very small. Oh, God. A photographer lowered her camera like it had become heavy. The room tilted toward Karyn, toward paper. Grayson slapped the table harder than he meant. She's a ghost. This is obstruction. Override it. No one moved. The only sound was champagne dying in flutes. Karyn stood. No flourish, just a file drawer opening. No override is possible, she said. Rider is tied to personhood under the original framework, Section 12. B. Subclause 3. Not employment. Name. Signature. Consent. She walked to the table and slid 3 pages in clear sleeves to Dr. Parks, each landing with a crisp tap. Executed framework. Notarized rider. Archive receipts, state filing, and internal vault. Dr. Parks examined the chain of custody. Clean, she said. Enforceable. Consent required. You're not on payroll. Grayson tried again, voice fraying. You don't get a seat. Karyn didn't blink. You never gave me a seat. I bolted my own to the floor. Dr. Parks turned to him. Brookline won't close without the final signature. Violating this invites exposure we won't swallow. Terrence, gentler. We just want it right. Grayson leaned on Clifford like a drowning man. Amend post date? Offer a release? Clifford shook his head like a priest adjusting a collar. Not without creating a paper trail inviting state review. She isn't grabbing the building, Gray. She is the threshold. Eyes went back to Karyn. She didn't step into the drama. She stepped into the structure. Let's not pretend this is personal, she said. You erase me from the org chart. You didn't erase me from law. She faced Dr. Parks. If Brookline wants the portfolio, you need my signature. I'm prepared to give it. The silence changed timbre, from shock to surrender. Grayson's mouth worked, suddenly very small. "What do you want?" he asked, barely audible. Karyn looked only at power that wasn't borrowed. "Three things," she said. "Public acknowledgement of my role before close, verbal and written. Retroactive equity at 1.8 for Magnolia's net take. And reinstatement, Senior Director, Strategic Compliance, reporting straight to the board. Monday, not someday." Wallpaper could be heard peeling. Grayson inhaled to bluff. Dr. Park's hand cut the air. "Will confer." She stepped out with Terrence, a whispering hurricane of law down the hall. Grayson leaned into Clifford's silence. "Fight it." Clifford didn't look up. "She's charging no interest, Gray." Minutes stretched. Press cameras hovered, unsure if this was spectacle or history. When Dr. Parks returned, the nod was small, surgical. "Terms are clean. We agree." She looked at Karyn, not Grayson. Terrence added, voice careful. "You good?" Grayson didn't answer. He pressed his glasses into the table like he could bruise oak. Clifford spoke instead. "Will amend. Rider reflecting equity allocation. Reinstatement letter notarized before you leave." Karyn approached the table like a metronome, steady, inevitable. She picked up a pen, one that moments ago had been a prop, and with the weight of gravity made it hers. One line, ink black as truth. Dr. Parks slid a separate folder. Karyn read the rehire letter once. Senior Director, Strategic Compliance. Reports to board. Effective immediately. She signed slower, honoring the ceremony they'd tried to choreograph without her. Someone in the press row whispered holy, and swallowed the rest. A single clap fired and died. "Acceptable?"
Dr. Parks asked.
"Accurate," Karyn said.
She didn't touch the champagne.
Didn't pose. She left the Zora room with no celebration coat draped over her forearm, leather folio light as a spent shell. In the elevator's mirrored walls, her face looked like her mama's when the mortgage got paid, tired and whole. Downstairs, the DJ's synth loop wove through laughter that had lost its confidence. Somewhere a VP tried to explain unexpected procedural stewardship to a blogger with hungry eyes. Karyn stepped into the night. Summer heat clung to the city like a whisper. Cars purred. A food truck hissed onions into the air. She stood on the curb and let the quiet name her. She hadn't torched anything. She'd kept the promise she made 12 years ago to buildings and people and paper. Do it right, even when they won't say thank you. Her phone buzzed, D'Angelo. "Heard the room bowed to you. Wish I'd filmed it." She typed, then deleted, then typed. It bowed to the claws. Another buzz, her baby brother Miles. "You good?" She looked up at the hotel's gold letters shining like bragging rights and wrote, "Yeah, we're okay." Revenge isn't fire. It's a ledger balance to the penny. Monday wasn't fireworks. It was a badge that beeped again. It was access restored, directories corrected, folders renamed to what they always were. It was a boardroom where she didn't sit against the wall. In that first meeting, Grayson smiled too wide, the skin around his eyes raw from a weekend's worth of spin. He said, "We like it might save him." She didn't save him. She saved the machine from eating itself. "We're going to acknowledge your leadership publicly," he said, voice brittle. "Press release at noon." She nodded once. "Be specific." He blinked. "Specific. Name the frameworks. Name the years. Don't round my work down to support." He swallowed. "Of course." She opened her laptop. Her screensaver was a river she'd never visited. And Grayson? The writer stays. We keep consent triggers baked into portfolio-level moves.
People change.
Paper watches. He nodded like a student on the third try. That afternoon, Magnolia issued a release that sounded like a confession wrapped in praise. Her inbox pinged like rain. Old analysts. City clerks. A field inspector who owed her a favor and a cigarette. "You held the line," one wrote. She thought of her mama's ring she didn't wear and the building that finally breathed clean air. In the months after, the city's rumor mill spit out 100 versions. Some had her flipping tables. Some had her weeping. The truth was quieter. A black woman walked into a room that forgot her and made the room remember the law. She still kept birthdays small, still read every clause out loud when the fluorescent light flickered and the world smelled like dry paper and old coffee. She trained a new analyst, a girl with cornrows and a crooked smile, to treat signatures like spells and writers like guardrails. People forget what they sign, Karyn said, pointing at the notary stamp. Paper doesn't. There'd be other Graysons, other rooms that thought pirates were better than librarians. She was ready. The deal closed. The champagne bottles ended up in recycling with their engraved date. But in the Zora room, months later, if you stood just right under the chandelier, you could almost hear a pen touch paper and the soft, decisive exhale of a woman who'd finally been seen. Not for the spectacle, for the accuracy, for the leverage she earned the long way. In the end, she didn't own the company. She owned the clause they never read.
And that was enough.
Thanks for watching. Please like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more stories like this.